Okay, ladies and gentlemen, today we will be talking about absolute value equations. So, just a little recap. Thus far, we've done solving linear equations. Solving equations. We've done some simplifying equations. We've gone over the properties of real numbers, and we've also done. I guess that's it. Anyway. Today, we're going to be solving equations, but this time it's a specific type of equation. We're going to be doing absolute value equations. So, I'm sure this is probably review, but this is an absolute value sign. So just the two little lines on the side of a number or something like that. So let's start with a little warm-up. If the absolute value of x equals 7, what are the possible values of x? So, in an absolute value, here's basically what it means. It means that how far from the number line, or how far from 0 on the number line, is the number inside of the absolute value sign. That number is always going to be positive once it comes out of the absolute value sign, but it can be positive or negative once it's inside. So x can equal -7 or 7 when it's inside of the absolute value sign. So if I were you on the side somewhere, I would say, absolute value. I spelled that wrong. Absolute value inside positive/negative. I'd write something like that just to remind you. So, just a recap of what we just said. We just said that the inside of the absolute value sign can be positive or negative, but when it comes out, it is always positive, because that's how we answer number 2. It says, if the absolute value of x equals -4, what are the possible values for x? And that would be none, because this number can never come out as a negative. An absolute value always ends up being a positive number as its outcome. It's always equal to that. Now, if it asks for what x is, like it did in number 1, that can be negative or positive. But when it comes out of the absolute value sign and it is equal, it can't be. So that's going to be none. So if you're ever doing it, we'll do a case where I'll show you. So that's just a little warm-up to get you introduced, get you reminded of what absolute value is. So just like with solving equations, we have steps to solve absolute value equations. First step is going to be isolate the absolute value expression, which means you want it to look like the absolute value of x equals something. You want this to be by itself. Now, it could be something like the absolute value of x minus 1 equals something. That's fine. We just need this to be the only thing there. We don't want this. We don't want the absolute value of x minus 1 plus 2 equals, 34. We don't want that. We want to get rid of this. Okay? So that's what it means when it says isolate the that's what it means when it says isolate the absolute value expression. Now, second thing we're going to do is, don't ask me why that just did that, because I couldn't tell you. The next thing we're going to do is, let me fix this. Okay. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to create 2 different cases. So we're going to take the inside of the absolute value sign and we're going to set it equal to the positive side and the negative, or the positive of the number it's equal to and the negative value that it's equal to. So that is going to look like something like this. It would look like x minus 1 equals 2. So you would pull both of those out. The inside, you'd say x minus 1 equals 2. Then you would say x minus 1 equals negative 2. So you're just taking this and making it positive and negative equal to the inside. So two separate cases for that. That's what you'll be doing. So let's move on. So that's the second step. Third step, solve both equations. Now, that just means to solve them like we were solving, like what we just did. So solve them like you were solving a normal equation, which I'll go through that. But that's all that means. Just isolate the variable. We want the variable by itself. We want it equal to something. Then we're done. Last step, check for extraneous solutions. That means once you get your two answers, you're going to go plug them back in the original and make sure that it's correct. Now, you may think that you don't have to do that, but if you are on a test and you give 2 and 0 as the answer, those may not be the answers. You need to check to make sure that they're not extraneous, and we'll do that. All right, let's get into that's the basics of it. Okay, so right here where it says what are extraneous values, just put do not work in original, which all that means is if we plug it in the original, it doesn't work. So they are not really solutions. They're extraneous solutions. All right. And that's all. That's it for absolute values. That's how you set it up. That's how you do it every single time. So let's dive into the examples. And this will basically be it for the videos, just doing these examples. We won't do every single one of them, but absolute value is really not super complicated. It's just the process, memorizing the process and doing it every time over and over again. Okay. So for 3, we have the absolute value of x minus 9 equals 5. So our first step is to isolate the absolute value sign. Now, there's nothing being added or subtracted or anything to this absolute value sign. So we're good on that. That part's over with. Now it says create 2 cases. Now we want to create both of our cases. So we're taking the inside. So we're going to take the x minus 9 for both of these. And then we need to set those equal to something. So we're going to set it equal to 5. So equal to 5 is one case. Then equal to negative 5. That's the only difference between these two. Is this one's negative, this one's positive. That's it. That's all you have to do. And then the rest you just work out like it were a normal equation that you were solving. So we'll look at the left side first. So on the left side, we have x minus 9 equals 5. The opposite, we have to get x by itself. So the opposite of subtracting 9, we need to move this 9. So the opposite of subtracting 9 would be to add 9. That'll get rid of that. Got to do it to both sides. So x is going to equal 14 on this side. Now we're going to do the same thing for the right side. So we're going to add 9 to both sides because we want to get x by itself. So that's going to get rid of that. It's going to be x equals 4. Now, these are our 2 answers we got, but we must go in, plug these both into the original equation to check it. So let's do that. So we have the absolute value. We'll start with 14. So the absolute value of 14 minus 9 equals 5. So 14 minus 9 is going to equal, it's not 4. It's going to be 5. So does the absolute value of 5 equal 5? Yes. So check. So that one's an answer. Now, we need to check 4. So I'm going to erase that. Pause the video if you need to. Now we're going to check 4. So we do have x minus that, but we're going to plug in 4 for x Yeah, and if I didn't say that, when you go back and check them, we found that x equals that. So that means anywhere where we see an x in the original equation, we're just going to plug x in there. That's how you check. All right. So 4 minus 9 is going to equal -5. The absolute value of -5 is 5, so that checks. So both of these are solutions. And a way that you may see it written, a way that you could write it, would be x equals, draw you some brackets, 4, 14. That would be your final answer. All right, so pause this, write this down, because I'm erasing it. All right, now that's the very simple version of it. So I'm going to go, we're going to go look at some harder versions, some versions where they're not isolated. Now, look at number 5. Our first step is to isolate the absolute value. This absolute value is not isolated because of this 17. That plus 17 has to be dealt with before we can do anything else. So if that's a positive 17, we want to get rid of that positive 17 and move it to the right. So the way you do that is you do the inverse operation, which is if that's a plus 17, we're going to do minus 17 to both sides. That's going to give us the absolute value of y minus 1 equals, let's see. Let me rewrite that. So we're going to minus that. And that's going to be what? 6? All right. So then the next step would be, that was the first step, is isolating that, isolating the absolute value. Now that it's isolated, we break it back up. Okay? Break it back up into different pieces, which will be my y minus 1 equals 6. That'll be one of our cases. Then the second case is y minus 1, so the inside just stays. And then we're going to make this a negative. And that's how you would do it. You would work both of those out. Which I'll let you work both of those out because you just have to solve the equation on each side. And you should be able to do that. Now let's look at this case. So, number 6. This case, there's a little 3 here outside of the absolute value. We need this absolute value to be isolated. So the way you do that is, this 3, since it's directly beside it like that, that means it's 3 times that. So what's the opposite of multiplying by 3? It would be dividing by 3. So we're just going to divide that. Anytime you see a little 3 out there like that, just divide it. So we're going to divide it by both sides. M plus 8. Absolute value of that is going to equal 39 divided by 3 is 13. Then we're going to do our second step, create 2 cases. So create 2 cases. Take the inside of the absolute value, set it equal to the original value, which is 13. Then you're going to make another case, keep the inside of the absolute value, which is m plus 8, and then just add the 13 and make it a negative. And then work that out the same way. Now, 17 is a special case. So watch what happens here. So, to get rid of this is just like the one we did before. We need to isolate this absolute value. The r minus 5, we need that just to be there without the 16. So we're going to do the opposite of 16 multiplied by that, which is dividing by 16. Now, when this divides by 16, it leaves us with the absolute value of r minus 5 equal to -2. Now, this absolute value can never produce a negative number here. So if you ever see an absolute value equal to a negative, it can't be done. It's no solution. It cannot be done. So if you ever see that, never let it happen. It cannot be done. Okay. Number 8. Number 8, you'll just take you'll just take this. We need to get rid of this because we have a y minus 10. The absolute value is not isolated. The absolute value is divided by this negative 2. So we have to do the opposite of what's happening, which is divided by negative 2. So we're going to multiply by negative 2 on both sides. So that's how you'd begin that one. Then you'll leave with y minus 10, absolute value, equals. You see 2 negatives will make this a positive, so this one's still good to do. Then make your 2 cases, make this a negative, and work from there. Okay. The rest of these you'll be able to do. Now, this is the only other problem that you'll have. So let's look at one that has both. Okay. So look at number 11. This will be the last one. So number 11, we need to isolate this absolute value sign. Actually, yeah, just make sure on all of these you check for extraneous values. So anyway, we're going to look at our absolute value. It's not isolated because we have this 4 here that's multiplied by that, and we have this 9 here that is subtracted. Now, you need to get rid of this 9 before you do anything to the 4 that is attached to this absolute value sign. And the reason for that is because if not, it'll make things a lot more tricky. So the first thing you want to do is get rid of whatever is added or subtracted before you divide or multiply. So that'll look like a minus 9 to both sides. So that'll get rid of this. Then you'll just have negative 4 absolute value, c plus 10 absolute value equals, that'll be negative 24. And then you're going to take this negative 4 and get rid of it so that this absolute value can be isolated, which the way that you would move it to the right is to divide by it. So then c plus 10 equals, that'll be what, 6? So then you would just, now that you've got it here, the absolute value is isolated. It is by itself on the left side, or the right side, it's by itself. And then you can make your 2 cases, bring out the inside, put it here, and then bring that down, make it a negative, bring it here, and it'll be a positive, and then you'll just work through solving it. Yeah, that is it for absolute values.